Welcome to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka from our studios here in London. Coming up on today's show, the world's population is aging due to lower birth rates and increased longevity. This has major implications on the global economy as well as the workforce, which is why Labour mobility partnerships are gaining traction. Jason Wendell, the strategy lead at Labour Mobility Partnerships, will soon be joining me to discuss the endless opportunities for both sending and destination countries. And this week, Bitcoin hit its highest price since 2021 amid record inflows to the cryptocurrency. Simon Dixon, the CEO and founder of banktothefuture.com, will be joining me from the Isle of Man with more insights on the reasons for the surge. Then later, as the Nigerian economy experiences one of its most severe economic crises in a generation, Tila Adede, CEO at the CFG Advisory, will be joining me from Lagos for his assessment on Tuesday's interest rate hike from the central bank. But first, Rishi Sunak is facing mounting pressure to crack down on Islamophobia in his party after one of his MPs caused outrage by saying that Islamists had got control of Labour's London Mayor Sadiq Khan. The Prime Minister described Lee Anderson's comments as wrong, and the lawmaker was subsequently suspended after he refused to apologise. The comments have caused another political firestorm for the government that is accused of being rife with anti-Muslim bigotry.
Can the Prime Minister confirm whether he too would welcome Mr Farage back into the Tory fold?
Mr Speaker, in our party, we have a proud tradition of diversity and accepting everyone from every background. Indeed, it is a proud record that puts Labour to shame, Mr Speaker. This is the party that delivered the first Jewish Prime Minister, the first female Prime Minister, the first black Chancellor, the first Muslim Home Secretary, and now led by the first British Asian Prime Minister. While it seems he can only champion men from North London, it's the Conservatives that represent modern Britain, Mr Speaker.
Well, for more on this, I was earlier joined in the studio by our Downing Street correspondent, Simon Pusey. Simon, so a date hasn't been set for the next general election, but certainly it feels like election fever is well and truly on its way. Lots of infighting, but this week it's about Islamophobic remarks and whether rhetoric does need to be dialed down a bit. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so I think the accusation to the Conservative Party is that quite a few of its more right-wing members are trying to stoke culture wars to give them a chance of winning votes in their constituencies. Maybe they're more rural constituencies, maybe they're slightly whiter, and they are trying to, the accusation is that they're trying to ham up these sort of culture wars to try and get the votes of people who will go out and vote that tend to be older people. Yeah. And so recently we've had someone called Lee Anderson, who's the former deputy chairman of the Conservative Party.
Pretty senior. Yeah,
he's been suspended after he said that Islamists had got control of Sadiq Khan. He's the mayor of London. A lot of people said that was Islamophobic comments, those were racist. He refused to apologise. And the Tory party, generally as a whole, when they went out on interviews after that, refused to condemn him as being Islamophobic, just said the comments were wrong. One of these people who came out and said that the comments were wrong is called Paul Scully. And he is a former mayoral candidate, tried to be mayor of London. He's now gone and said that there are no-go areas and parts of Tower Hamlets. Now, Tower Hamlets is a part of London,
East London,
which is very diverse, but it contains places like Shoreditch, which is very expensive and trendy, Canary Wharf, which is where a lot of the bankers operate from, the Tower of London, Brick Lane. These are very well-known
iconic
areas
places,
of London.
But some are quite scary.
Like across London, right?
Yeah.
London is diverse. Like a lot of capital cities across the world, there are places that you may not go to because you're slightly concerned at various parts of night. There are places in Chelsea which have
high crime
reputations. Exactly. So I think what we're seeing here is sort of MP after MP coming out and saying slightly controversial things because they think it'll chime with their electorate. They might give them a chance of getting in at the next election.
They want to save their jobs, don't they, really?
So I think they're kind of looking at that. I don't know whether there's some kind of central thing at Conservative HQ where they're saying, hey, let's try and stoke this, but it seems to be, a lot of people do think that people like Lee Anderson are talking sense and are saying it how it is and being straight down the line, and they're watching other parties like Reform and the popularity of Nigel Farage, who basically say what they want and they don't care about political correctness, and see that they're getting quite popular, and maybe they should be doing the same thing. It's worth saying that when asked, the Prime Minister's spokesperson said that he doesn't think that there are no-go areas in this borough, and says that the diverse communities and societies across the UK are a good thing. But I think that this might be people who are worried about their jobs within the Conservative Party coming out and trying to align themselves with voters who might think, older people often hark back, don't they? Oh, back in my day, I could leave the front door open, we could play out on the street as kids. Yeah. We always hear that.
Britain is changing.
Britain is changing, but everyone, old people saying, "Oh, back in my day," I think that's what they're trying to hammer home. They're trying to cement for when the election comes around.
The good old days.
And we know people who vote tend to be older. People who actually bother to go out and vote tend to be older. So I think they're trying to win those people over. Playing to people's fears is a standard thing to do in politics, and especially when you're behind in the polls. I think there's sort of levels of desperation here, and you could argue that Tower Hamlets is incredibly diverse, and there might be some streets and areas that you might avoid. We know that knife crime is high in London. We hear a lot about tragic deaths.
The acid attack perpetrator.
Yeah, so
apparently he was hiding in Tower Hamlets.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, but that attack took part in Battersea and Clapham. There's no sort of place that is too salubrious or is too dodgy. I don't think in London. It's all sort of mixed into one because we are quite lucky, I think, to have a diverse city. So it just depends on who you are and what you like. And we've seen lots of sort of memes and people saying, well, these are my no-go areas in London, and it's Brewdog, or it's places that people don't like. So it just depends on the person. So. I think, and we're probably likely to see more Lee Andersons, Paul Scullys coming out and trying to sort of up the rhetoric to get political points over their rivals so that they stand a chance in the next election and keep their jobs.
Yes, just very briefly and succinctly, if you can, Simon, does the Conservative Party have a problem with Islamophobia in the same way? The Labour Party, of course, are clamouring onto this because they have had issues with anti-Semitism. Is it the same thing?
Well, I think it's hard to say it's the same thing or not, but I think a lot of people have pointed out that if the comments that Lee Anderson made, which is Sadiq Khan has been controlled by Islamists, if that had been said about any other race, if it had been said about Jewish people, or if it's been said about black people, then the Conservatives would come out immediately and said this is racist. Whereas I think that they're basically accusing double standards. They're saying that you can say it's wrong, but you can't say it's Islamophobic. And I think that is trying to appeal to people who think that these protests that we see every single week in the streets of London, which is in support of Palestine in the main, I think that they're trying to appeal to voters who are saying, well, why are we letting the centre of our capital be taken over every week by these hundreds of thousands of protesters who are not condemning Hamas, who are saying that this is very wrong. So I think they're looking at that. That's what they're trying to do. Yeah. And so they're not calling that out for the reason they're trying to win over those voters. So I think, it is a fair concern that maybe not that they're racist against Islamic people, but maybe that they're not calling it out in the same strong terms that they would if it was anti-Semitism.
Goodness me, I think the rhetoric is likely to increase, sadly, as we get closer to the ballot. Thank you, Simon. Now to our next topic. Labour mobility partnerships aim to maximise the economic and social benefits of workforce mobility while minimising barriers and challenges for migrants seeking to relocate for employment purposes. These partnerships play a crucial role in promoting economic growth, filling labour market gaps and supporting the well-being of workers and their families. The world's population is ageing due to lower birth rates and increased longevity, which is why skills mapping through labour mobility partnerships is gaining traction in the global north. Well, for more on this, I'm now being joined by Jason Wendell, the strategy lead at Labour Mobility Partnerships. Jason Wendell, it's a pleasure having you on Channel's Business Global today. Anytime I talk about migration on this show, it can send shivers down the backs of our viewers because there has been a kind of love-hate relationship with migrants and migration, particularly in the United Kingdom, where the Prime Minister is pledging to stop the boats. But in your experience of working at LAMP, What are the main benefits that countries or regions can derive from investing in comprehensive skills mapping systems for labour migration?
Yeah, so firstly, thank you for having me here. It's great to talk about labor mobility and opportunities that I see with migration and with an organization called LAMP. What we're trying to do, what we've seen is that in places like the UK, in places like Europe, in places like Japan, the societies are aging, and as a result, there's a massive need for workers across a number of sectors. And whether you map it or not, it's often easy to predict ahead of time what are going to be the biggest sectors that need workers. So these are going to be things like construction, elderly care, hospitality and tourism, manufacturing, etc. And many of the countries that are at the cutting edge of this, or let's say the leading edge of this challenge, are places like Germany or Japan. They both have median ages well over 45. They've already mapped out and said there's 14 industries that we really need workers in, and we're willing to create some pathways that enable people to come in a well-managed way to fill these needs. So that process, I think the UK has started some of it, or it has at least identified some critical areas where workers are needed. I know trucking is a major shortage area in the UK. Understanding that is very critical for being able to create well-managed systems of migration that ultimately win the support of the public because they're filling critical needs that everyone sees around them. So far, nobody wants their grandmother to be taken care of by a robot. And at this point, that's what's going to happen if we don't bring people in to help with those types of jobs.
It's quite interesting. I chuckled when you said nobody wants their grandmother to be taking care of the robot. You sure about that? You know, if a robot can do the school drop off in the morning and make tea for grandma, you know, that's a win-win. I'm joking, by the way, but I'm sure some people would be interested in that, Jason. But I want you to talk to me more about the kind of work LAMP does and other stakeholders like you when it comes to playing a role in enhancing skills mapping, because there are some major elephants in the room that people may not want to address, such as a lot of people don't want migrants coming into their country. That's one thing. And on the other hand, especially sending countries in Africa, I can talk about Nigeria, for example, where we're seeing a massive brain drain. You know, our best doctors, our best teachers are in places like Washington, D.C. and in London, not where they should be, you know, back home delivering care and education for society. So how are you able to bridge that gap and appease both sides?
Sure. So one of the things that LAMP does is try to work on both sides of the border to understand what are the needs of employers and what are the aspirations of workers in sending countries. And by understanding both of those needs, we're able to find ways to address the bottlenecks and the challenges, the pain points in the systems. One thing that's needed across the board are people in the trade and services sectors. Those sectors do not require many, many years of training. And that's where the big numbers are coming from. When you look at, we're going to try to create hundreds of millions of jobs across borders, you can call them cross-border livelihoods, over the next 30 years, because we're looking at the demographic trends. But for it to happen in practice, you do have to understand what is an employer looking for, and that might involve hard skills. So, you know, every country has different certification schemes. I was just in Japan working on a project to help Kenyan auto mechanics work in the Japanese auto mechanics sector. There they have 4.5 jobs for every one applicant. So they really need auto mechanics. But employers are concerned about, well, will these auto mechanics trained in Kenya actually have what we need for a grade 3 auto mechanic in Japan? So understanding those technical requirements is important. But another important element is understanding the soft skills that are needed, professional norms, communication styles, those types of things to fit into a totally different culture, different language, etc. Then on the sending side, to make sure that the skilling apparatus are meeting the technical needs, the technical requirements, but also equipping people with the type of soft skills to thrive in a different context. On the question of brain drain, one of the things that we have seen in Nigeria is that there's been a tripling in the number of nurses who have passed the qualification exam in Nigeria from about 4,000 to 12,000 since 2020. And what we think is driving that is the opportunity to find jobs abroad in places like the UK. During that time, only 3,000 or so nurses from Nigeria have gone to the UK. So what you're seeing is the increase in skills is more than keeping pace with the number of people that are leaving the country.
Jason Wendell, who is the strategy lead at Labour Mobility Partnerships, otherwise known as LAB, really insightful listening to your expertise today.
It's great to speak to you. Thank you very much. And happy to come back on again.
Bitcoin hit its highest price since 2021 this week amid record inflows to the cryptocurrency. The latest rally hit $60,000, representing a remarkable turnaround for the coin, which was trading below $20,000 just 1 year ago. Well, for more on this, I'm now being joined by Simon Dixon. He's the CEO and founder of banktothefuture.com. Simon joins me from the Isle of Man. Simon Dixon, it has been a long time. Thank you so much for joining me on Channel's Business Global. I have actually been thinking about you and your firm over the past couple of days because Bitcoin hit a 2-year high earlier in the week. What are some of the factors that have contributed to this surge?
Well, it's about to hit 60,000, not a forward-looking statement, but we're almost there now. Yeah. The all-time high was 69,000. So in every 4-year cycle, we tend to hit all new all-time highs before something called halving, which is where every 4 years, the supply of Bitcoin that miners get cuts in half. But we've had 3 major factors, which is as we get more and more geopolitical uncertainty, people are getting concerned about owning their own assets outside of a bank. The second factor is in the US, ETFs are approved, so you can now buy Bitcoin through the stock market. Mm-hmm. And the third factor is that people are using things called stable coins, where you can send digital dollars, much like a central bank digital currency, but issued by a company. And those excess profits are actually being reinvested into Bitcoin from the stable coin issuers. So you're getting buying pressure from those wanting to own their money from the stock market and the bond market.
Is Bitcoin now back in favor with safe haven investors? You know, they usually go for gold. Are you seeing trends where people are like, do you know what? Let me put my money in Bitcoin. It's safer.
Yeah, well, we've had the new ETF launch, which has brought in $10 billion of inflows into Bitcoin. And so now you have Wall Street that have finally got on board. So people like Larry Fink from BlackRock has now come out and said that Bitcoin's no longer a scam for money launderers. It's actually a safe haven asset. Why? Because he makes money from it now. And so all of Wall Street are now saying, telling the Bitcoin story to through all their registered investment advisors, and compliance teams are gradually coming in saying, oh, all of our customers are asking us to be able to sell Bitcoin. And so one by one, they're all allowing it. And so now traditional finance is in. They make money from Bitcoin now. And so they're all pushing the story finally. If you can't beat us, join us.
Absolutely. Just very finally and briefly, if you can, Simon, you know, the majority of our viewers, millions of them, are watching from Nigeria. I don't know if you know much about the climate there, but there is a lot of interest in cryptocurrency, very disruptive. And it does appear as if every now and then, whether it's the central bank or who else, they seem to put their thumb down on those invested in crypto. What kind of message do you have for them? Should they still be interested in the cryptocurrency market?
Yeah, so I've spent a lot of time with the Nigerian Bitcoin community online. And, you know, obviously the central bank want to push their product, which is their new central bank digital currency. Yeah. I would warn people against that. To me, it is a form of communism on a blockchain in order to get more control. So any movements towards pushing a central bank digital currency is a movement away from freedom. And Bitcoin is the exact opposite. So you have to make a slight distinction between Bitcoin and crypto. There's lots of scams in crypto. You know, Bitcoin has been this solid thing that, and so, yeah, any resistance against that, we saw certain exchanges being, banned in Nigeria. One of the major ones being Binance, but they've had a lot of regulatory issues with money laundering. Yeah. The other thing is that, you know, the peer-to-peer market as well. So I'm keeping a close eye on it because Nigeria is one of the most important markets for Bitcoin. And I think it brings more freedom to the population in Nigeria that people should really be, ensuring that the central bank doesn't resist against it.
Well, it's causing a firestorm on X, formerly known as Twitter. And it's great to actually have some expert advice from you, Simon Dixon, who is the author of Bank to the Future and, of course, the CEO and co-founder of banktothefuture.com. Having a very great week, aren't you, Simon? Thank you so much for your time today. Thousands of Nigerians have been taking part in demonstrations across the country against soaring living costs that has left millions struggling to buy food. In response to soaring inflation, the central bank hiked interest rates to 22.75% on Tuesday to reduce the amount of money circulating in the economy. Well, for more on this, I'm now being joined by Tila Adede, the CEO at the CFG Advisory. Tila joins me from Lagos State. Mr. Tila Adede, thank you so much for joining me on Channels Business Global. It's been a busy week of economic news. Of course, you've been forecasting for the Nigerian economy for the past few months. In fact, the CFG Advisory, the macro outlook from the CFG Advisory suggested before the CBN Governor's outlook on Wednesday that investors should prepare for high interest regime. It's happened. I presume you agree that this was a good decision.
Definitely a move in the right direction in terms of the tightening stance. And the reason for this is quite simple. Money supply in Nigeria increased by 40 trillion naira from January last year, from 53 trillion naira to 93 trillion naira in January this year. So that's a pretty significant increase in money supply. And when you have a lot of liquidity around, it tends to chase not only the naira, but also it tends to chase the dollar. And when you have an interest rate regime that is lower than the rate of inflation, it's also going to chase the dollar. So definitely a right move in the right direction.
Well, I suppose it remains to be seen. There are protests in the land. I know, of course, these are corrective measures of the renewed hope agenda, but it still really is hurting people. You remain confident that the country can work its way towards economic stability and growth. Not everybody agrees with you. How is this administration going to do it? And do you think they are heading in the right direction?
Well, first of all, I think we must appreciate the fact that there are 133 million Nigerians in multidimensional poverty. And a lot must be done to be able to alleviate the problems of this teeming population of Nigeria. It's important also that we begin to ensure that our population remains an asset instead of a liability. Because if you do not address these issues, my own favorite way of doing this is to ensure you grow the economy over 8 to 10% on a sustainable basis. If you do that and you achieve this level of economic growth, you will lift most of these people out of poverty. And that is what we haven't done. The reason why I remain confident in the fact that we can turn this around is that the fundamentals of the Nigerian economy remain very strong. But unfortunately, we've had bad economic leadership. So if the reforms this government is taking through, there's not much room. And I think the central bank governor alludes to this, that there's not much wiggle room anymore for reforms because we have our backs against the wall and there's only one way out now. We need to go back on a state of sustained reforms. And if they're sincere with their reform policies and if they're committed, I believe that we can turn it around.
Is there sincerity, Mr. Tilewa? I'm not sure if you saw the exclusive statement that was released by the Minister of Finance to Channels Television last week. Was there sincerity? You mentioned bad leadership. Are we in good hands?
Well, we need to, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. And I think it's still too early to say. I have not been a fan of the way the policies have been implemented. There have been a lot of false starts. I believe that, while a lot of people overwhelmingly support the policies, I think where you find disagreements is with the implementation. Now that we've seen a series of false starts, I think now with the central bank governor coming out yesterday to talk about monetary policy and in terms of the way he's moving the rates and a lot of his pronouncements, I think you can see that the markets have begun to react to that. The Naira has begun to appreciate, which should be on a continued trajectory of appreciation. The financial markets will stabilize because now rates are up investments can begin to come in, people can begin to save. And if he's serious about his inflation targeting at 21%, with what he's signaling with the rate hikes, then I think we can begin to see some level of reform and of some level of economic recovery.
Gosh, Mr. Tila Adede, really insightful listening to your expertise. Yeah, there are so many issues that this administration have to tackle, but it is possible. We are remaining as hopeful and as optimistic as the CFG advisory, because it also affects us here in the diaspora, who basically been acting as a welfare state, propping up our poor and vulnerable relatives. So yes, let's remain hopeful that these measures will turn the country around. Mr. Tila Adede, who is the CEO of the CFG advisory, thank you so much for your time today.
Have a nice afternoon.
Well, sadly, that's all we have time for today. But as always, do get in touch with your comments and suggestions. I'll be seeing you at the same time next week for more in-depth business analysis on Channel's Business Global. Goodbye.